Imagine the silence of an old library late at night, the rustle of yellowed newspaper pages, the creak of a wooden chair, the soft breath of dust settling on forgotten volumes. Now imagine a man who spent 27 years of his life in that silence, turning page after page, searching out what others chose to ignore. Stones falling from a clear sky, rains of frogs, fiery ships gliding through the night sky long before man learnt to fly. He collected these stories like someone collects stamps or dried flowers. Only his collection consisted of mysteries that science had declared damned. Greetings to you, my dear listeners, on this quiet night or morning, wherever you are right now. Please write in the comments what city you're from and what time it is. I'm always interested in imagining how our voices find each other across space and time. Today, we're going on a journey to follow a man who dared to look where others were afraid to look, and who turned collecting the unexplainable into his life's work. The year 1874, the city of Albany in the state of New York. In an ordinary American family is born a boy who will be called Charles Hoy Fort. His childhood passes under the heavy hand of an authoritarian father in an atmosphere of strictness and discipline, where there was no room for dreams and free thoughts. Perhaps it was this pressure, this iron order, imposed from the outside, awakened in young Charles that deep distrust of any authority, to any attempt to tell others what is true and what is false. He grew up a quiet, thoughtful child who found solace in natural history, collecting stamps from distant continents, dissecting birds, studying rock samples, as if trying to find in these silent witnesses of nature answers to questions he dared not ask aloud. At the age of 18, he leaves home and sets off on a journey around the world. Imagine this: a young man, barely into adulthood, challenges the world by going where the horizon meets the unknown. What was he looking for in this wanderlust? Freedom? Or perhaps proof that the world is wider and stranger than textbooks and sermons tell us? We don't know. But when he returned, something inside him had already changed forever. Years pass. In 1896, Charles meets Anne Feeling, the woman who would become his wife, his first reader, his faithful companion for decades to come. In their small flat, among their books and manuscripts, he tries to find himself as a writer. He writes short stories, novels, hopes for recognition. But success doesn't come. His only published novel, called The Outcast Makers, comes out in 1999 and fails miserably. Critics are indifferent. Readers don't notice. The book disappears like a stone thrown into a deep well without leaving even a circle on the water. But sometimes defeat is not the end, but the beginning. Sometimes you have to lose one path to find another, the real one. And when Fort receives a small inheritance around the year 1916, he makes a decision that will change not only his life, but also the way we look at the boundaries of the known. He gives up trying to become a fiction writer. Instead, he devotes himself to an entirely different endeavor, collecting and systematizing what he will later call damning facts. Imagine the New York Public Library. High vaults, long rows of shelves, the smell of old paper and printing ink. Day after day, year after year, a middle-aged man comes here in the morning and only leaves in the evening. He sits at the same desk. In front of him, stacks of newspapers and scientific journals, American, British, French. He reads slowly, carefully, making notes on small cards. When one library no longer satisfies his appetite for information, he moves to London, to the British Museum, where the process is repeated. The rustle of pages, the creak of the pen, silence, broken only by the occasional cough of other readers. What is he looking for in this ocean of the printed word? He's looking for cracks in the edifice of scientific knowledge. He's looking for stories that don't fit neat theories. He looks for eyewitness accounts of things that shouldn't have happened, but did. And he finds them. Thousands, tens of thousands of such stories, hidden in the back of the periodicals, in the short notes that editors put between advertisements, as if apologizing for printing such nonsense at all. Here is a note from a provincial newspaper. In one village, during a thunderstorm, a strangely shaped, polished, axe-like stone fell from the sky. The locals swear that they saw it flying together with lightning. Scientists explain, it's just an ancient tool that people found in the field and attributed it to a thunderstorm. But Fort notes, what if there are dozens of such stories? If in different countries, in different eras, people find these thunderstones and associate them with the heavens, maybe it's not a matter of superstition, but of science being too quick to dismiss inconvenient evidence. Or here's another story. 1820th year, somewhere in Europe. After a thunderstorm, they find a piece of limestone falling from the sky. Limestone. But limestone can't be a meteorite. It's a sedimentary rock that forms here on Earth. Astrophysicists recognize only 3 types of meteorites: iron, stone, and ironstone. limestone does not fit into this classification. So scientists ignore the find, and Fort writes it down on a card and puts it in his file cabinet, which grows day by day, becoming a real library of the unexplained. By the end of his life, he would have collected over 60,000 notes, divided into 1,300 sections. It is the monumental work of one man, a work that took 27 years of uninterrupted labor, 27 years in library silence among dust and forgotten stories. But Forth is not just a collector of oddities. He doesn't collect these facts for entertainment or sensationalism. He has a purpose, a philosophical, almost missionary purpose. He believes that science has become a new religion, a new dogma. It proclaims itself to be the realm of objective knowledge. But in reality, it behaves like the medieval church, excommunicating heretics, burning inconvenient books, declaring damned those facts that do not fit its sacred theories. Fort calls these rejected evidences damned, not because they are false, but because science has cursed them, refused to recognize them, thrown them outside its temple. And he wonders, what if the path to true knowledge lies precisely through the study of these anomalies? What if, by rejecting the strange and unexplainable, we reject the keys to a deeper understanding of the world? After all, the history of science is full of examples of yesterday's heresies becoming today's truths. Meteorites were once thought to be the stuff of superstitious peasants, until one fell right in front of a committee of French academics. Microbes were a mockery, until Pasteur forced the world to look through a microscope. Perhaps Fort's damning facts will one day take their place in the scientific picture of the world. In 1919, his first and most important book, The Book of the Damned, was published. Imagine him holding a fresh copy in his hands, smelling the ink, running his fingers over the cover. 27 years of work turned into a few hundred pages of text. But what text? His style is strange, unlike anything else. He writes in fragments of phrases, in verbless sentences, jumping from topic to topic, creating a rhythm like the beat of a pulse or the rustle of rain on a roof. This is neither a scientific monograph nor a journalistic report. It is something between a philosophical treatise and a prose poem, where every word is chosen to convey not only information, but also a feeling of how shaky and conventional the boundaries between the known and the unknown are. He introduces a term that will become his trademark: intermediatism. This word means border state, the zone between fact and fantasy, between knowledge and ignorance. Fourth argues that everything in the universe is interconnected, that there are no clear boundaries, that any classification is provisional. What we call science today will be superstition tomorrow. What we reject as superstition today may become science tomorrow. He utters a phrase that would become his aphorism. Science today is superstition tomorrow. Science tomorrow is superstition today. Critics don't know what to make of this book. Some call it brilliant. Others call it the ravings of a madman. But among readers, it finds its admirers. People who are tired of scientific arrogance, of having their personal experience declared a hallucination or a hoax, find support in Fort's words. He gives them the right to doubt, the right to ask uncomfortable questions, the right to believe their own eyes, even if scientists say they are wrong. The Book of the Damned is followed by 3 more. In 1923, The New Lands, a book devoted to astronomical mysteries, is published. Fort bombards astronomers with criticism, pointing out the contradictions in their theories and the observations they ignore. He describes dark, spindly bodies that crossed the disk of the sun in the 18th and 19th centuries. They were not planets. Their orbits did not match anything known. They were not comets. They had no tails. What were they? Forth cautiously suggests, perhaps huge spaceships belonging to civilizations we don't even know about. In the year 1931, when Fort was already 57 years old, his 3rd book, Hear Ye, was published. The title itself sounds like a call, like a cry in the night. Listen, pay attention. Do not pass by. In this book, he expands his research, delving into parapsychology and cryptozoology, describing mysterious geographical locations that seem to attract trouble. Decades before the world learns of the Bermuda Triangle, Fort is already writing about places where ships and aeroplanes disappear, where compasses go crazy, where the laws of nature seem to work differently. It is in this book, in Hear Ye, that he first uses a word that will enter our language and remain in it forever. Teleportation, the instantaneous movement of objects from one point in space to another, bypassing everything in between. Fort did not invent this phenomenon. He found a name for it, collected evidence, showed that stories of objects suddenly disappearing and appearing were not isolated, that they formed a pattern that required explanation. And in 1932, in the last year of his life, his 4th book, Wild Talents, was published. This is the darkest of his works, devoted to poltergeist, spontaneous combustion of people, ghosts, and psychokinesis. Imagine A man who has spent a lifetime gathering facts feels time slipping through his fingers. He's 68 years old. His health is failing, but he's still writing, still recording stories about how things move without touch, how rocks fall from the void, how fire flares up on human skin for no apparent reason. He will die a few months after publication, but his work will live on. But let's go back to his ideas, to those provocative theories that Forth created, not as dogmas, but as ways of thinking, as an invitation to look at the world from a different angle. One of the most famous is the Super Sargasso Sea theory. Do you know about the Sargasso Sea in the Atlantic? It's a strange place where ocean currents create an area of almost still water, covered in floating algae. Ships have dreaded this place for centuries for fear of getting stuck in its sticky embrace. Forth takes this idea and takes it to the sky. He postulates the existence of a region above the Earth's surface where gravity acts differently or not at all. There, in this Super Sargasso Sea, float in suspension debris, rubbish, old cargo from interplanetary shipwrecks. They gather there like seaweed in the ocean, waiting to be picked up. And sometimes, during strong atmospheric storms, when the Earth's cyclones reach sufficient strength, these objects break off their invisible anchors and fall back to Earth, puzzling people who find them in the middle of fields or in their gardens. Is that a crazy idea? It could be. But Fort never claimed that his theories were the ultimate truth. He offered them as exercises for the mind, as ways to explain the unexplainable, to show that scientific thinking should not be the monopoly of academics, that everyone has the right to build their own hypotheses, their own pictures of the world, even if they seem fantastic. Even more provocative was his theory of property. Fort suggested that the Earth and all of humanity are someone else's property. We think we are free, that we control our own destiny, but in fact, we belong to someone else, beings from other worlds, other civilizations. And these owners have warned the other space civilizations. Stay away. This is our territory. Don't interfere. That's why we see strange ships in the sky. But they don't land. They don't make contact. They just watch. Like an observer in a zoo watches the animals in the cage without opening the door. Fort was not naive. He realized the absurdity of his assumptions. But that was his strength. He showed that any theory, even the most respected scientific theory, is ultimately just a model, an attempt to explain the incomprehensible. And if science can build its models, why can't he build his? At least his models were honest in their fantasticality, whereas science often disguised its ignorance under a cloak of certainty. Now let's dive deeper into the very essence of his work, into those damning facts he so carefully collected. Let's start with the strangest. Things that fall from the sky. Not meteorites, that's clear. Science recognizes them. No, we're talking about things that shouldn't fall, that don't fit into any classification. 1820th year. Somewhere in Europe, after a thunderstorm, a piece of limestone is found, apparently falling from the sky. Eyewitnesses saw it fly. But limestone is a sedimentary rock formed at the bottom of ancient seas, layer upon layer, over millions of years. How can it fall from the sky? Astrophysicists are silent. The fact is ignored, forgotten. The year 1855. A piece of pumice, a light volcanic rock permeated with air bubbles, falls. Again, not a meteorite. Again, silence. And in the year 1931, in the town of Eaton, Colorado, the most incredible thing happens. A piece of brass falls from the sky. Brass is an alloy of copper and zinc, a man-made material. How can it fall from the sky? Where did it come from? Nobody knows. Nobody wants to know. It's a damned fact. Fort finds a story from the year 1994. Yes, it happened after his death, but he described similar ones in his lifetime. A white bolide flies over the Kursk, Belgorod, and Kharkov regions. They find debris. Chemical analysis shows the impossible. 99% pure iron, with virtually no impurities of nickel, magnesium, or titanium, which are always present in meteorites. And the shape of the debris is even stranger. It's a crumpled pipe with threads, clearly man-made. Something created by a mind has fallen. But whose mind? There are also thunderstones. In different cultures, on different continents, people find strange stones after thunderstorms, polished, wedge-shaped, sometimes resembling axes or other tools. Locals swear they've seen them fly with lightning, and they've stabbed into trees during storms. Scientists' explanation is simple. They are ancient stone tools that people found in the ground and mistakenly associated with thunderstorms. But Fort wonders, what if there are hundreds of such stories? If in Europe, Asia, America, Africa, everywhere people are telling the same story, could there be something to it? In the year 1930, a blood-chilling event takes place in the Rhine Mountains. 5 human corpses in icy clothes fall from the sky. 5 bodies, frozen to death, fall from a clear sky onto a mountain slope. Who were they? How did they end up there in the cold? Where did they fall from? The questions remain unanswered, and Fort also describes the fall of a limestone ball, inside which are found the remains of seashells, and creatures that look like trilobites, ancient arthropods that died out millions of years ago. The piece of ancient seabed fell from the sky as if someone had carved it out and thrown it back to Earth from the past. But the strangest, the most inexplicable, were the remains of animals. This phenomenon has been known since antiquity. Roman historians described frogs falling from the sky. Medieval chronicles are full of references to fish falling into fields. Fort had collected dozens, hundreds of such stories from different eras and different countries, and he noticed patterns that made the simple explanation: a tornado lifted them out of the pond, completely unsatisfactory. Firstly, the animals were sorted. When frogs fell, they were frogs of the same size, the same age. There were no frogs and adults mixed together, no other species that lived in the same pond. Only one species, only one size, as if someone had carefully selected them before sending them into the sky. Second, the animals fell clean. No mud, silt, algae, sticks, rubbish, all the things that would inevitably raise a tornado from the pond, fell with them. Just the animals, by themselves, carefully delivered from an unknown source. Third, no one has ever seen a tornado. A tornado powerful enough to lift hundreds of fish or frogs should be visible from afar, should leave destruction, should be dangerous to people. But in the places where the animals fell, no one saw anything unusual in the sky. There was no wind, there was no storm, just a quiet day. And suddenly, a rain of frogs. Fourthly, no one has ever found the ponds emptied. If the tornado sucked all the water and all the frogs out of the pond, someone must have noticed it. Fishermen, farmers, locals, someone must have come and seen an empty hole where yesterday there was a lake. But there is no such evidence. 1882nd year Iowa. Frogs are falling from the sky. Small, one size fits all. Imagine a farmer who walks out of his house after a short rain and sees his yard strewn with little frogs. They're jumping. They're alive. They're completely wet. Where did they come from? He raises his eyes to the sky, but the sky is silent. The year 1578, the city of Bergen. It's raining big yellow mice. Hundreds of mice fall on the streets, on the roofs of houses, causing panic among the townspeople. The chronicles of the time have preserved the story, but have not kept an explanation. 1894, Mississippi. Gopher tortoises fall. A special kind of land tortoise. They don't live in water, so a tornado from a pond couldn't lift them. They're heavy, they're slow, they live in burrows. How did they end up in the sky? Fort pondered these stories in the long evenings, sitting in his flat, surrounded by cards. Anna would bring him tea, quietly placing the cup on the table so as not to disturb his thoughts. He stared out the window, where the lights of New York City at night twinkled, and tried to imagine what could explain all these oddities. A super Sargasso Sea? Teleportation? Interference from intelligent beings who, for some reason, moved animals from place to place? He didn't know. But he did know one thing. The official explanation, a tornado from the pond, didn't hold up under close scrutiny. And here we come to one of the most mysterious events, which Fort regarded as a classic example of his damning facts. The Tunguska phenomenon. The 30th of June in the year 1908. Early morning over the Siberian taiga. Imagine a boundless green ocean of larches and pines. Silence, broken only by the cries of birds and the rustle of wind in the branches. And suddenly, the sky splits. Eyewitnesses, hundreds of kilometers away from the scene, saw a blinding flash of light, brighter than the sun. Then came the shock wave. Trees bent like blades of grass in the hurricane wind. Windows flew out of their frames. People fell to the ground. The rumble could be heard 1,000 kilometers away. And then, for several weeks, bright nights settled over Europe and Asia. The sky did not darken completely, even at midnight. You could read a newspaper without a lamp. What was that? Science is certain. A meteorite or a comet. A celestial body entered the atmosphere and exploded. A simple explanation, reassuring, understandable. But Forth, studying the evidence, found cracks in it, through which something strange was seeping. Firstly, it was an air burst at an altitude of 5 or 6 kilometers, not a surface impact. Meteorites usually leave craters. There was no crater here. There was just a crater from the blast wave, not the impact. Secondly, they didn't find the substance of the body itself. Expeditions looked for fragments of meteorite, and nothing. It was as if the object had completely vaporized or never existed in a material sense. Third, the nature of the destruction was unusual. The forest was felled in a shape resembling a butterfly, with wings diverging from the center, and the tree trunks themselves showed scorch marks, a massive release of radiant energy that scorched the bark on one side. Fourth, witnesses described several flight paths. Some saw the fireball flying from south to north, others from east to west. Could there have been more than one? Or did one body change direction? Fort saw the Tunguska event as the perfect, cursed fact, a case that science rushes to explain with a simple formula, ignoring details that don't fit that formula. He didn't claim to know the answer. He was simply pointing out It's not as simple as you're told. There is a mystery here, deeper than meets the eye. Some researchers would later hypothesize that the Tunguska body had been shot down by some other object, some phenomenon capable of maneuvering. Fort, if he were alive, would have approved of this boldness of thought, this willingness to consider the improbable. Because for him, the question, what if, was always more valuable than the premature, we know answer. Now let's talk about poltergeists, a phenomenon that Forth explored with particular interest in his latest book, Wild Talents. The word poltergeist comes from the German language and means noisy spirit. But Forth was in no hurry to attribute these phenomena to spirits or ghosts. He saw poltergeists as something else, something that was qualitatively similar to the other anomalies in his collection. Imagine an ordinary flat in an ordinary house. A family lives a quiet life, and suddenly it starts. Stones fall from the ceiling, although the ceiling is intact. Objects disappear from closed cupboards and appear in other rooms. Dishes fly off shelves, but don't break, landing neatly. Doors open and close on their own. Knocks are heard, footsteps, voices, but no one is there. Fort collected many such stories and noticed a pattern. Poltergeists are often tied to one person, usually a child or teenager. When that person leaves the house, the phenomena stops. When they return, they start again. It is as if something is following this person. Something is using them as a source of energy or focus. But the interesting thing is that poltergeists show signs of being intelligent and selective. Here is a case that occurred after Fort's death, but it perfectly illustrates what he wrote about. A poltergeist started in the flat of an astronaut. A heavy wardrobe was knocked over. The metal hinges on the doors were literally torn, as if they had been twisted by a monstrous force. But at the same time, and here we come to the strangest part, the fragile objects remained intact. The bottles in this cabinet were not broken. The bottles were carefully moved. The mirror was unharmed. The old tube TV, which should have shattered at the slightest impact, continued to work. What kind of force can tear through metal without hitting glass? What mind decides what to destroy and what to preserve? Forth found a connection between poltergeist and falling rocks. In many poltergeist cases, rocks fell plumb, ignoring the trajectories that physics dictates. They fell near a particular person, following them from room to room. It was like raining animals, the same selectivity, the same impossibility in terms of the ordinary laws of nature. He also noticed similarities between poltergeist and teleportation. Objects disappeared in one place and reappeared in another, bypassing the space in between. Clothes passed through closed wardrobe doors. Books moved from shelf to table, leaving no trace of falling. It was the same phenomenon as brass falling from the sky or rain of sorted frogs, the movement of matter in a way that modern physics cannot explain. Particularly interesting were the round holes in the glass. Fort described instances of perfectly round holes in window glass during a poltergeist. Not impact cracks, not bullet marks, but neatly cut circles, as if someone had used an invisible glass cutter. This phenomenon has been observed in other contexts as well. There was a case of poltergeist in the town of Vysovolchsk, where such round holes appeared in the windows. And during the famous Petrozavodsk phenomenon, when a luminous, jellyfish-shaped object was observed over the city, residents found similar round holes in the panes of their windows. Fort would see this as confirmation of his intuition. Different anomalous phenomena have a common nature. They are parts of the same picture, fragments of the same mosaic that we have not yet learnt to put together. He looked for these connections everywhere. Falls from the sky, rains of animals, poltergeist, strange lights in the sky. All these, according to Fort, are manifestations of the same phenomenon, the same force or law of nature that we have not yet discovered. He did not name this law, nor did he formulate a theory definitively. He merely pointed out the patterns, the recurring motifs, leaving the reader to draw his own conclusions. And here we come to the most visionary aspect of Fort's work, his role as a forerunner of ufology. His books, written long before the year 1947, when the world first heard the term flying saucer, already contained hundreds of reports of strange objects in the sky. Glowing airships, observed since the 1880s. Cigar-shaped bodies floating slowly over cities. Lights that followed trains and ships as if showing curiosity. Fort had collected these stories from newspapers and magazines when no one was talking about aliens and interplanetary visits, when the very concept of UFOs did not yet exist. He described the dark, spindle-shaped bodies that astronomers of the 18th and 19th centuries had observed against the background of the sun's disk. They were not planets. Their orbits did not correspond to known celestial bodies. They were not comets. They had no tails and no characteristic glow. They were simply crossing the sun's disk, large, dark, mysterious. Fort speculated cautiously. Perhaps they were huge spacecraft belonging to civilizations we don't even know about. Reading these lines today, it is impossible not to feel a shiver. A man who worked in a library at the beginning of the 20th century with a pen and cards was able to see the contours of what would become one of the major mysteries of the second half of the century. He did not live to see the era of flying saucers, Roswell, the mass sightings of UFOs. But he prepared the ground, created the language, systematized the phenomena. When, in 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold saw 9 strange objects over the Cascade Mountains and described their motion as saucers skittering across the water, the world was ready for the news, thanks in part to Fort. His influence spread far beyond scientific anomalistics. Science fiction writers fell in love with his ideas. Edmund Hamilton, creator of space opera, drew inspiration from damning facts. Eric Frank Russell wrote stories based on Fortean concepts. Henry Kuttner used motifs of falls from the sky and strange artifacts. And Howard Lovecraft, the master of cosmic horror, found in Fort's work confirmation of his intuition that the universe is full of things that lie beyond human comprehension. But Fort himself treated his fame with a certain amount of irony. In 1931, a year before his death, one of his admirers, the writer Tiffany Thayer, founded the Fort Society. The purpose was to promote Fort's ideas, republish his books, and continue collecting anomalous phenomena. Fort was flattered, but skeptical. He feared, and his fears proved prophetic, that society would attract the wrong people. Religious fanatics who would turn his skepticism into a new faith. Spiritualists whom he despised for their gullibility. Conspiracy theorists who would see every anomaly as proof of a worldwide conspiracy. He wanted people to think, to question. But he didn't want to create a new dogma to replace the old. Indeed, after his death, especially in the second half of the 20th century, Forteanism took different paths. Some of his followers retained the spirit of scientific skepticism, continuing to collect and analyze anomalies with cold reason. But another part slid into an abyss of paranoia and mysticism, turning every strange occurrence into proof of alien contact, government conspiracy, or impending apocalypse. In Russia, Fort's books appeared late, only in the late 1990s and early 90s, when the old barriers collapsed and a flood of previously forbidden information poured into the country. Imagine this time: perestroika, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the sudden freedom to read anything. People who had been cut off from Western culture for decades greedily pounced on books that had previously been available only to a select few. Forth came to Russia in this chaotic, febrile period. And, unfortunately, it came without a critical tradition, without the context of scientific skepticism that existed in the West. There, Forteanism developed gradually, going through discussions, arguments, separating the grain from the chaff. In Russia, however, it came out of the blue, in a society that had just lost one belief system and was desperately searching for another. The result was predictable. There was a flood of haphazard, marginalized information. Dozens of books, magazines, television programs devoted to the paranormal appeared. Every second author referred to Fort, but few understood the essence of his philosophy. His skepticism turned into credulity. His call to doubt authority turned into a willingness to believe any sensation. His carefully documented cases became mixed with outright fabrications and news ducks. Conspiracy has blossomed into a lush flower. Every strange case became proof of a secret government, alien invasion, ancient civilizations, or mystical forces. Fort, who had spent his life fighting dogmatism, unwittingly became a banner for the new dogmatists. His name was used by people who least understood his true intentions. He wanted to teach people to think, and he was used to teach people not to think, but to believe. It is sad, but it is also instructive. It shows how easily even the brightest ideas can be distorted when they fall into the hands of those who seek not truth, but comfort, not questions, but answers, not doubt, but certainty. Forth would have understood the irony. He would have smiled sadly, shaken his head, and returned to his cards, continuing to collect facts that did not fit into any theories, old or new. But let us return to Fort himself, to his personality, to his style. Because his literary style is not just a way of presentation. It is a philosophical statement. It is a form inseparable from the content. When you read Fort, you immediately realize this is not an ordinary scientific work, not a journalistic report, not fiction. It is something different, strange, mesmerizing. He writes in scraps, verbless sentences, fragments of thoughts that follow one after another, like waves lapping against the shore. He jumps from topic to topic, creating a rhythm that is almost musical, almost hypnotic. Reading him, you begin to feel the same giddiness that he must have felt himself, sitting among his 60,000 cards, trying to find a pattern in the chaos of anomalies. He loves oxymorons, these strange combinations of opposites, real unreal, probable unprobable, existence non-existence. These words sound like incantations, like attempts to capture what lies between categories, what escapes definition. Because it was there, in these border zones, in these places where one thing ends and another has not yet begun, that Fort searched for truth. He's deliberately hyperbolizing, exaggerates. He brings facts to the point of absurdity, not to deceive, but to show the conventionality of any knowledge. He writes so that the reader feels the agony of certainty, the horror of the moment when you realize that everything you thought was certain is in fact as shaky as the sand beneath your feet. His texts are like prose poems. They require emotional immersion rather than logical analysis. You cannot read Fort quickly, superficially, diagonally. You have to let his words penetrate you, change the way you see the world. It is a slow reading, meditative, almost ritualistic. And in this sense, his work lives on, not only in the facts he has collected, but in the very way he presents them. He teaches us to look at the world not through the prism of ready-made answers, but through the prism of questions. He shows us that beauty is not in clarity, but in mystery, not in understanding, but in wonder. 1932nd year. Charles Fort is 68 years old. His health has been compromised by decades of sedentary work in poorly ventilated libraries, endless hours spent at a desk. He is tired. But his work is done. 4 books are published. The card catalogs are compiled. He has done what he had to do, opened the door to a different way of thinking, shown the way to those who would dare to follow it. He dies quietly, at home, surrounded by his books and cards. Anna is by his side, as always. Outside the window, New York is buzzing, the city that has been his home for most of his life. Somewhere out there, in the library, remains his chair, his desk, his window seat, where he sat for so many years. Now someone else will sit there, reading other books, looking for other answers. But his legacy does not die. It lives on in everyone who dares to ask a question when everyone else is sure of the answer. It lives on in everyone who notices the strange, the unexplainable, and does not rush to dismiss it. It lives in every researcher who collects data that does not fit into a theory and does not throw it away, but carefully preserves it, realizing that it could be the key to the next breakthrough. The fort didn't give us any answers. It didn't intend to. He gave us something more valuable. He gave us the right not to know, the right to be in uncertainty, the right to recognize that the world is wider than our concepts, stranger than our theories, more mysterious than our explanations. In an age when everyone wants to seem all-knowing, when every expert is ready to explain everything in the world, Fort's voice sounds refreshing. I don't know. And that's fine, because in ignorance, there is freedom. When you think you know everything, your mind closes down. You stop looking. You stop listening. You stop wondering. But when you admit that you don't know, the whole world becomes an open book. Every day an adventure, every strange incident an invitation to explore. Imagine this world that Forth saw through the prism of his damning facts. A world where rocks fall from a clear sky, where frogs materialize out of thin air, where ships of fire glide through the night, where unseen forces move objects through walls. This is not a world of chaos and terror. This is a world of wonder, a world where the impossible is possible, where mystery lurks around every corner, where the boundaries between the known and the unknown are constantly being blurred and redrawn. And perhaps the most important thing the fort has left us with is a reminder of humility. Science has reached incredible heights. We've split the atom, decoded the genome, sent probes to the edge of the solar system. We know so much. But the Forth whispers in our ears, don't forget what you don't know. Don't forget the rocks that fall outside the laws of physics. Animals appearing where they shouldn't be. Luminous objects that have been observed for centuries, but you can't explain. These anomalies are not the enemy of science. They are its future. Because every great revolution in scientific thinking began with an anomaly, with a fact that didn't fit the picture, the orbit of Mercury, which led to the theory of relativity, the black body radiation that gave rise to quantum mechanics, the redshift of galaxies, which revealed an expanding universe. Who knows which of Fort's anomalies will be the next clue? Maybe the reigns of animals hide an unknown physical process related to atmospheric electricity or quantum tunneling. Maybe the poltergeist will tell us something about the nature of consciousness and its ability to affect matter. Maybe strange lights in the sky do indeed indicate visitations that change our understanding of life in the universe. Or maybe these phenomena will remain mysteries forever. Constant reminders that the world does not have to be understood by us. That nature does not adjust to our theories, but exists according to its own laws, most of which we have yet to discover. Right now, while you are listening to these words, something strange is happening somewhere in the world. Someone sees lights in the sky that do not move the way aeroplanes or satellites should. Someone discovers an unusually shaped rock in their garden that seems to have fallen straight from the sky. Someone wakes up in the night to the sound of falling objects and finds no explanation. These people are modern-day witnesses to the damning facts. And perhaps there is a new Fort somewhere, patiently collecting their stories, putting together a new mosaic preparing a new revolution in our understanding of reality. In the meantime, we can only remember this strange, stubborn man who spent 27 years in libraries, turning the yellowed pages of newspapers, writing out on cards what others deemed unworthy of attention. Charles Hoy Fort, the man who collected damning facts, the man who taught us to doubt, the man who showed us that the most interesting truths live not at the center of our knowledge, but at its fringes, where the map ends and the inscription begins. Dragons are here. Maybe there really are dragons. Maybe they've always been here. We just didn't want to see them. Fort did. He looked where others were afraid to look. And what he saw changed everything. Thank you for spending this night with me in the company of Charles Fort and his amazing, damning, wonderful facts. I hope you leave with the feeling that the world is a little wider, a little more mysterious, a little more interesting. Cherish that feeling. It's precious. It reminds us that no matter how much we learn, there is always room for wonder. Good night, dear listeners, wherever you are now. May your dreams be full of mystery and wonder. May you never lose the ability to wonder. And may the rocks falling from the sky remind you that the universe is always ready to give a surprise to those who are ready to see it. Until next time, good night.